Peace, family. My name is Talib Sabra, and I'm your host today for Sis We Need to Talk, sitting in for the lovely Tisha Hillman. And today we're going to touch on respecting and protecting the black woman, right? And that's what this show is about: is highlighting issues as it pertains to us as a community, but specifically with black women today. And because R. Kelly has been in the news, we're going to touch a little bit on that. But I think that it's important because R. Kelly, in the situation that occurred with him, isn't in a vacuum, right? These are issues and situations that plagued our women and plague our community uh, for some time, roughly about 400 years. And it's important to give like a historical context as to why these issues are prevalent and some things that have happened, and to see where we have failed just as a community in protecting and respecting our women. So, for those who may have been like under a rock or something with regards to what has been happening in the news of late, R. Kelly has been in the media because of the allegations against him that he has a sex cult. And there was a recent documentary that was out called Surviving R. Kelly that highlighted a lot of the women who have alleged to have been in his house and been subjected to sexual abuse, molestation, assault, and a whole rack of other different types of charges. So before we dive into R. Kelly, let's just lay the foundation and the groundwork for what brought us to this point, right? A famous historical or historian rather, Dr. John Henry Clark, once said that there was no record of abuse, teenage pregnancy, and defilement of African women on the continent of Africa prior to the invasion of foreigners. And a couple of months ago, I was in Ghana, in Cape Coast and Accra, right? And when I was in Cape Coast, there were two castles that were there. It's called Almina and Cape Coast, and I can't recall which one it was, but on one of them there was dungeons. Well, both of them had dungeons, but one specifically had the captain's area or his quarters, and you had the female dungeon, right? And right above the captain's dungeon, or excuse me, captain's quarters, was a staircase up to his quarters from the female dungeon. So every night he could walk, he could look in, open the trap door, look down, and see which African woman he wanted to rape that night or molest that night. And if you refused, as a woman, not only would you have gotten beaten, but they would have put a ball and chain on your ankle and put you smack in the center of the courtyard, and you would stay there for hours upon hours, maybe even some days, rain, shine, whatever the case may be, just to prove the point and break you down as a woman to let you know that you are not in control of your bodily functions or anything with regards to their sexual nature. And then as a man, because I'm a black man, as a man, just imagine what that impact may have on us being able just to hear it, because the men were in the dungeons that were semi adjacent to that. So it was nothing that you could do if that was your wife, if that was your sister, if that was your daughter, and you're hearing the shrieks and you're hearing the screams. There's nothing that you can do, right? And that all is about the psychological enslavement that happened during that time as well, and it set us up for today because these are things that have been passed down generationally. So you have that experience of our ancestors who were enslaved in Elmina or Cape Coast, but then also that was Ghana, so it's West Africa. In South Africa, there was a woman by the name of Sarah Bartman, or that name rather was imposed upon her, born in the late 1700s. And she was one in which she had, like most of our women are, very voluptuous, breast, butt, the whole nine. And when you had the Dutch colonizers that were there, they saw this, and they enslaved her clan, which was the Khoi Khoi, and shipped her to the other side of South Africa in Cape Town, where she wasn't able to read, but they coerced her into signing this contract to go up to England. Now, what she didn't know, but what they all had intentions to do, was put her a part of a freak show, right? And some of you are maybe familiar with the term Venus Hottentot, but and Beyonce was in the news maybe a couple of years ago because there were rumors that she was going to play her in a biopic, but they took her up to Europe and paraded her around in a freak show. So you have people prodding and can touch her behind and her body and all these things. So once again, we're talking about black women who have no sovereignty over their own body due to colonization and slavery. And she died. She when she was captured and enslaved, she was around 16 years old, and she died in Europe around the age of 26. And it was rumored that she died from was it pneumonia or some other form of alcoholism. But a lot of people suggest that she was prostituted out. So you see, this isn't something that just happened, recently. These are the secrets in which plague a lot of us in our community and the families because we always taught growing up, okay, you're not supposed to talk about, sexual molestation or some other dark things like that within the family. But again, you got to see the historical context of where all of this has come from. So we have Sarah Bartman that happened to back in the 1700s. We understand what happened during the actual slave trade during the 1600s up into slavery was abolished in the 1800s. But let's talk about it a bit though, because you were in our ancestors on the western coast of Africa were wrapped up in the slave trade. And on the ships, what were the conditions like? Now, many of us may have seen the actual picture of the slave ship and us packed in it like sardines around the entire boat. But we got to ask ourselves, if we're in balls and if we're chained to each other in these tight quarters, again, what can men do to help protect and honor the black woman during this time? There was not much that we could do, right? So when the captains on this ship, we know what happened in the slave castle. So now let's go to the ship. When the captains on this ship or whoever was manning the ship looked around to decide which one they were going to defile that night, a lot of men attempted to fight back. A lot of men attempted to do what they could do, but they were unable to do it just because of the fact that clearly they didn't have any weapons, they were chained, the whole nine. And I want to talk about John Newton for a second. John Newton was the author of Amazing Grace. Many sing it during church or whatever have you. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, right? But he actually once said, slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls and thus are not destined for the next world. He goes on to say, when the women and girls, now this is the account for when they were actually on the slave ship. When the women and girls are taken on board a ship, naked, trembling, terrified, they are often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey, check the terminology now, the prey is divided upon the spot. Resistance or refusal would be utterly in vain. And then he goes on to say, I sin with a high hand. So we have to let's unpack that for a second. All right. I sin with a high hand. So this is a man that wrote Amazing Grace that is taken into account as to the conditions on the actual slave ship. And when the women would come on, there's nothing that they could do to protect their own bodily sovereignty once again. So you have these, as he described, white savages come on and they're already naked, do and have with their way with them. So what does this do to the psychology of us as a people? One, for the women that are enduring it, and then two, for the man that are witnessing it. So from a woman's perspective, it's like, oh well, at any time I can be taken. At any time they can do whatever it is that they want to do. And what about the ones that actually got pregnant from these encounters? Right? A lot of them were thrown off the ship when they were in the slave castles. A lot of them would have to go back to the actual villages, have the babies, and then come back to be enslaved, right? So that right there has a disconnect between the mother and the child. It breaks the natural relationship that they would have. And then psychologically, what does that do? So again, these are things that you may get accustomed to because you know, well, there's absolutely nothing that I can do during this time. And then when you fast forward and you look at it, it's like, wow, we're still here. But these are the things in which we go through, and a lot of this is not discussed, whether it be within family or whether it be in the school system. So because we don't understand exactly the true plight of what happened to our women during this time, what happened to the men during this time, then a lot of the younger generation, not a lot of us generally, may not really may take for granted what it is that we have endured. And that's why you can make songs that either make fun of or mock what has gone on within our history. You'll be able to do things that are unfit or unbecoming of us just as a people because we are detached from the history that happened. And let's talk about Thomas Jefferson for a bit, right? So many may not know, or you may know, about Thomas Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was a woman who was enslaved by Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson he fathered a lot of her children, right? So let's see what was it that Thomas Jefferson said about Sally Hemings and blacks in general, right? Blacks smelled bad and were physically unattractive, required less sleep, were dumb, cowardly, and incapable of grief advanced it, therefore as suspicion only, that blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of mind and body. So this is a man who oftentimes would rape and molest the female slaves, or the female enslaved Africans on his plantation, but have the nerve to say blacks smell bad. So his behavior is completely different than what his actions are saying. This was back in the 1700s, and Thomas Jefferson is widely regarded within U.S. American history. And if this is going on during that time, once again, we're tracking the plight of the black woman. At that time, the black woman was subjected to the cause and anything in which the master wanted them to do. So she, once again, had no autonomy of her body, And then let's fast forward a little bit more. J. Marion Sims. He is regarded as the father of modern gynecology. He created a makeshift hospital in his backyard and created the first vaginal speculum from a pewter spoon. And there's a book called, what's the book called? It's by Harriet Washington. The name escapes me right now. But it's Medical Apartheid. That's what it is. Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. And it chronicles enslaved Africans and how we were used as guinea pigs. And in particular, with the black women, a lot of these medical advancements were made on unwilling participants, the enslaved African people, the enslaved African women, rather. And with him, this is his reason, he reasoned that enslaved African women were able to bear great pain because their race made them more durable, and thus they were well suited for painful medical experiments. So what is he saying here? He's saying that because you're black, because you're a part of the African race, your black race, it makes you more durable to sustain and go through painful medical experiments. We're going to take a quick break. I want you to marinate on that a bit. And then once we come back on the other side, we're going to dive into exactly what that means, how that plays a role within today's society. And then we're going to touch on a little bit of the Willie Lynch letter right after this.
When's the last time someone said thanks for checking over your shoulder before changing lanes? Or gave you a pat on the back for sticking to the speed limit? Or a thumbs up for not tailgating? Probably never. Which is too bad, considering safe drivers make the roads safer for everyone. That's why Allstate appreciates safe drivers like no one else. And they show it by saving you 45% or more, along with giving you safe driving bonus checks, deductible rewards, and extra discounts with the DriveWise app. So the next time you come to a complete stop in an intersection, ask yourself, Why haven't I switched to Allstate?
The Brandeo Insurance Group, your local DMV Allstate agent, can help you save 45% or more for driving safely. Call him at 410-424-0844 and get a quote today.
It pays to drive safely. Call a local Allstate agent today and find out how you can save 45% or more. Switching to Allstate is worth it.
Savings vary, subject to terms, conditions, and availability.
Do you like to travel? Do you like to make money? Well, here's a way you can do both. Vacation Travel allows you the luxury of doing just that. If you want access to unpublished fares, reduced rates for travel agents, access to worldwide selection for family, group cruises, and all types of destination travel, then contact www.kingscourt.vacation.com or call 240-393-7962. That's 240-393-7962. You deserve to travel like royalty. See you on your next vacation.
And welcome back to Sis We Need to Talk. I'm your guest host, Talib Saber, sitting in for the lovely Tisha Hillman. And we were talking about just the degradation of the black woman in its historical context. You know, given the things in the media with regards to R. Kelly now, I think that it's important to really touch on the historical part of how we got to this point. Right. And we left off at J. Marion Sims, the father of modern gynecology. We were talking about would he used a pewter spoon as the first vaginal speculum on enslaved African women. And one thing to note is that he became very wealthy from these experimentations on our women way back when. And they were not willing participants at all with regards to that. And again, no sovereignty over their own bodily functions and just body generally. So this is back in the 17 and the 1800s when all of this occurred. Again, black men were both enslaved, so there's nothing much that we can do from a perspective of helping our women during this time, outside revolts, of course, and revolution. Well, let's fast forward a bit. So during this time, we know that we were subjected to enslavement, but I want to bring your attention to what's called the Willie Lynch letter. Now, the Willie Lynch letter was a letter that was written by a Caribbean slave owner, British slave owner from the West Indies in 1712. And there's a couple of things, we're going to take our time with this letter a bit, because there's a couple of things that he said in the letter that actually rings true today. And I'm going to highlight the things about the black woman, but just us as a race generally about what he said. So in here he says, as he's addressing, so the reason that he called up, the reason that he had this letter and made this announcement was because they were different enslavers in Virginia that were having issues with enslaved Africans. I guess whether it be for the revolts or them not working, whatever have you. So they called him up because of his reputation as cracking the whip, essentially. All right. So as he addressed them, he said, "In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that, if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. All right. So now that will be 2012, actually, from 1712. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves, and I take these differences and make them bigger. I use fear, disrupt, and envy for purposes of control. You must use the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. You must use the female versus the male, and the male versus the female." So let's stop there for a second. We know that within our community, there's a big issue with regards to colorism, right? And we see that whether you see that a lot of men may go for women who are lighter, right? We call them red bones. There's if you watch the videos, the music videos, you may see a particular type of what's called a video vixen or a woman in the video, right? She typically is black, but what's not called too black, long wavy hair. This prototype that's often used within a lot of videos, right? And then with regards to our darker skinned women, they're called various names that are degrading and derogatory with regards to their skin complexion, their tone, and the whole nine. So a lot of these things, we have to ask ourselves, where did this come from? Where did this mentality come from? And a lot of it stems from slavery and what was imposed upon us. And we see just right off the gate with this letter that it was intentional to be able to do this, to divide and conquer, because in numbers, we would be able to overthrow and overtake the actual master. But with this divide and conquer technique, you see how there's the community is divided even to this day. And then the female versus the male. Oftentimes you may hear some women say that men ain't ish. You may hear some men say the same thing about women. It's just this big divide amongst the gender, And once again, you got to ask yourself, where did this behavior come from? So let's go actually to what the techniques were used in making this so-called Negro, as they claim it. So it says in the letter, for example, take the case of the wild stud horse. One thing that you'll find in this letter is that they relate a lot of how they broke in a horse to how they would break in black people. And I'm using black people because in the letter they actually use another term, but I'm kind of making it a little better for TV. For example, take the case of the wild stud horse, a female horse and an already infant horse, and compare the breaking process to two captured black males in their natural state. A pregnant woman with her infant offspring. Take the stud horse, break him for limited containment. Now, it says, when it comes to breaking the uncivilized black man, use the same process, but vary the degree and step up the pressure so as to do a complete reversal of the mind. Take the meanest, most restless black man, strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining black men, the female, and the black infant. Tar and feather him. Tie each leg to a different horse faced in the opposite direction. Set him afire and beat both horses to pull him apart in front of the remaining black people. The next step is to take a bullwhip and beat the remaining black man to the point of death in front of the female and the infant. Don't kill him, but put the fear of God in him, for he can be useful for future breeding. These are the tactics that they used. Now, just can you fathom that if today, and I give thanks to Dr. Joy DeGruy Leary who really breaks this down, but if today, on this set, there was some type of, say a bird flew in, and a bird flies in and sits on this desk, and as we're recording this show, and I take a hammer and just bust the brains out of this bird on TV, right? Not only would the immediate person who's watching this be traumatized, but if they tell anybody else about what happened, it'll be traumatized. And then we know that this will be rebroadcasted. It'll be shared, liked on social media, all these things. And then that leads to the traumatic effect as well. So imagine being another man, seeing this, a woman, and then a child. Imagine the psychological effects of this. As the woman seeing this, you see your man spread eagle tied to each side of a horse and then essentially being torn apart in front of you. And if he's not torn apart, stressed so much that is dang near impossible for him to maneuver and to walk. And then they said they tar and feather him and set him on fire. I've never been burnt before, but I've been by a stove and I know exactly how that feels. But just imagine being set on fire, you know, in front of all these people. And then imagine the effects that it has on them. So for the men seeing this, they're like, oh, well, that happened to the strongest one on here, so I'm not going to say or do anything. You know, for the women here, they're going to say, oh, well, you know, there's nothing that he can do for me. He can't protect me because look at what happens to him. And this is the strongest one. And then for the child, imagine how traumatic that would be if that was your father and you saw that. You know, if that was an uncle, if that was a brother, you know. So this is the psychological effects that slavery had on, you know, us as a people. And let's really break down what they did with the African woman. It says, take the female and run a series of tests on her to see if she will submit to your desires willingly. So what desires could they possibly be talking about? Desires like rape, sexual assault, you know, willingly. Test her in every way because she is the most important factor for good economics, meaning breeding. If she shows any sign of resistance in submitting completely to your will, do not hesitate to use the bullwhip on her to extract the last bit of bee out of her. Take care not to kill her, for in doing so, you'll spoil good economics. So again, let's track the trauma. First, on the continent. Being snatched away and taken away from your actual village or your community. Then, within the slave dungeons, being secluded and isolated from the one half of your community, and then being subjected to rape, sexual assaults, and different molestation tactics as well, and not having any control. Then, on a slave ship, same thing that happens. Subjected to sexual assault, rapes, all these things, and then we go to the plantation. So now you're completely away from your homeland. You're in another land. You've already experienced this type of trauma, and then now you're here. And now we're saying that she must submit, or the master's saying that she must submit to your desires willingly, right? Be careful not to kill her, but bullwhip her. Take any type of resistance that she may have, extract that out of her. So this was a thorough process, a psychological process. This isn't something that just happened overnight. This happened for 400 years, you know. So this is in the subconscious and in the psyche of your mind. So let's continue a bit. We have reversed the relationship. In her natural uncivilized state, she would have a strong dependency on the uncivilized black man, and she would have a limited protective tendency toward her independent male offspring, and would raise male offsprings to be dependent just like her. So now you're not going to teach your young boys to be independent. You're going to teach them to be dependent, because if you teach them to be independent, what may have happened to their father or their uncle will happen to them. Nature had provided for this type of balance. We reversed nature by burning and pulling a civilized black person apart and bullwhipping the other to the point of death, all in her presence. By her being left alone, unprotected, with the male image destroyed, the ordeal caused her to move from her psychologically dependent state to a frozen independent state. In this frozen state of independence, she will raise her male and female offspring in reverse roles. For fear of the young male's life, she will psychologically train him to be mentally weak and dependent, but physically strong. Because she has become psychologically independent, she would train her female offspring to be psychologically independent. What have you got? You've got the black woman out front and the black man behind and scared. So we're about to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into exactly the meaning behind that, and then progress modernly to how that plays out today within the media, and then in the R. Kelly timeline, right after this.
It's the new, all-natural, family-friendly pharmacy, Family Choice Pharmacy, located at 8313 Annapolis Road, New Carrollton, Maryland. Family Choice offers alternative medicines as well as discount programs you can easily enjoy. Come be a part of our family at Family Choice Pharmacy, as every family should know their pharmacist. If you're looking to join the family today, you can reach us at 301-577-1212 at Family Choice Pharmacy.
If you like to roller skate, you will love Lanham Skate Center. We offer all kinds of specials, birthday parties, skate classes, and more. You can even reserve the rink for a special event. Skate rentals only $3, so roll on over to Lanham Skate Center today. Located at 9901 Lanham Severn Road in Lanham, Maryland. For more information about our weekly schedule, visit us on the web at lanhamskatecenter.com or call for more information at 301-577-1733. That's 301-577-1733.
And again, welcome back to Sis We Need to Talk. I'm your guest host, Talib Saber, and we are breaking down the Willie Lynch letter and the process of breaking the African woman and how it relates modernly to the state of our black women today and our race generally. And we left off where we were talking about how the slave master would intentionally do tactics and different type of things to psychologically enslave the African man and the woman. And here we left off at where it talked about because of the breaking down of the African woman mentally, she would raise her children in reverse roles. But the thing I wanted to point out just about this particular process is the resistance. You know, because we're talking about sexual assault, we're talking about rape, we're talking about these things that are imposed upon our black women. And the signs of resistance that they're talking about, because naturally, you know, you're going to fight back. Naturally, you don't want to. You have different cultures and different things in place to where you don't subject yourself to this type of behavior. But because of enslavement, it broke all of that down. And that's exactly what happened within the Willie Lynch letter. They broke all of this down, and now you have our black women who are essentially unprotected. You know, here it says, if we're going to tear your black man apart, set him on fire, tar and feather him, bullwhip him, do all these things, you have no protection from him. You know, and then since you do not have protection from him, what are we going to do to you? We would do anything and everything that we want to do to you, and nothing will happen. You know, you don't have someone to come save you or anything like that. You're subjected to the will of what we, as the enslavers, will do. And that's the thing that really transitions today with regards to when you see things in the media, as far as some women who have been, once again, subjected to sexual assault, brutalized, beaten, suffer from domestic violence, and all of these things. But these are things that has happened generationally, and now we have to attack it generationally. This isn't just happening in a vacuum. You know, this was systemic and systematic. In this letter, it talked about that it was 300 years in the making, or it would take 300 years to be able to essentially come out of this, but it was supposed to be in place for 300 years. So, you know, fast forward to today, modernly, right? Now, you come from, so we have the Emancipation Proclamation and the abolishment of slavery, and let's move to the mid 20th century, 1960s, 1970s, and everything. So you have the civil rights era in the movement. You still have our women being subjected to sexual assault and rapes and all these things, and essentially no protection because the state is administering a lot of this during those times. So the Jim Crow era up into the civil rights era. And then you have the civil rights era when all the legislation was passed. And then we move to the 1970s. And I think that's critical to the R. Kelly topic, because in the 70s, you got to ask yourself, well, what was prevalent in the 70s? What was happening? What was going on? Now, in the entertainment field, you had movies like The Mac, Dolomite, Willie Dynamite, and all these things that popularized pimping and being hoes. And because you had this glorification of this pimping and hoe type behavior, think about, again, the mentality that goes on with regards to this for the youth and other people who are watching it. So you have, once again, everything that has happened traumatically for our African women, our black women, up until the 1970s. And then on screen, you have these women being pimped out or being happy to be, or rather being shown to be happy to enjoy the lifestyle of being a so-called side piece, or have allowing a man to have all these different women in which he's sleeping with and have no respect for her specifically, you know. And when this is glamorized and glorified, then you have to look at, okay, those that are coming up under that, though the generation after that, that's the generation of the R. Kellys, you know, even the Snoops, right? So fast forward to the 1990s, and when all of this occurred, this is the culture and the environment that has been created. Because in the 70s, if you're seeing this growing up as a child, you're like, okay, well, this must be cool. This is the happening thing. You know, the actors getting paid from it. You know, they're wearing the fly gear, they're riding in the you know, nice whips and all these things. So this must be the route to go. So you see in the lyrics and in the songs of some of the music, you know, it glorifies that, or it shows that. Not all music, but you know, you have a portion or a sect of it. So anything that's talking about, yeah, bees, hoes, you know, stealing your girl, doing this, doing that, you know, all these things that are in the music, you have to understand how that plays a role psychologically. And then also, when you have an entertainment industry that's what, $1 billion industry, that's being able to take advantage of what's going on in the community and the cultural differences within the community. It's like, okay, well, we can play on this and we can program the people who are watching this. So instead of showing you a breadth of different type of music, as far as, like, you know, you have your R&B, your R&B, your hip hop, jazz, all these type of things. I'm gonna show you just one genre, and then just have on mainstream media this one particular topic that we're going to address. That's why when you can look at the Billboard 100 and you see that maybe of that 100, a third of the music may be of a specific kind and a specific nature, talking about a specific type of thing. You know, no worth in the black woman, no value in the black woman, the continued disrespect of the black women. So when you're going around to different people within the community and then they're reacting or treating the black woman this way, you cannot ask it, or you cannot say to yourself, well, wow, where did this come from? I don't understand why, you know, this is happening. Well, look at the history, look at the timeline of it. You know, we know what happened traumatically, but then look at what's perpetuated within society. If on your day-to-day you treat women as though, you know, either they don't exist or they don't have any value with regards to how you interact with them. And I'm talking as us as brothers too, you know, how we interact and how we value them. Then, of course, that's going to be played out in those that come from that same community and are placed in the entertainment industry. You can't expect them to talk about things that they're unfamiliar with. I'm not going to talk about, you know, praising a black woman or talking about how she carved and paved the way, and how even though she went through all of these things and was subjected to all of these things for 400 years, she still was the ones to hold us down and to help us continue and really lift us up from, you know, the enslavement scenario and situation during slavery, when, you know, she was subjected to the sexual assaults and the rapes and all these things, how she had to put her feelings in a bag, you know, throw it behind her, and still get, not only cook in the master's kitchen, but also cook for her children, feed her children. You know, we're not talking about how you had some of the most fierce warriors, honestly, have been black women. Some of the ones, the Harriet Tubmans, you know, the Ida B. Wells, you know, even taking it far back to like the Queen Nzingas and the Ya Asantewa. And stand on her real quick. She was the one. This is a queen in Ghana. Once she found out what was going on with the transatlantic slave trade, she was fighting the British and telling them like, no, you're not going to take our people and enslave them. So we're going to fight back. And then she challenged the men and said, if you will not fight, then we will fight. Sit down. We will fight. So when you have this history of the black woman being fierce warriors, revolutionaries, and things of the kind, and you're not being taught that, but you're being taught that they are something less than, or oh, you shouldn't listen to her because you know she's a woman. You know, just that, not even she's a woman, so a woman aren't going to tell me what to do. You know, when you have that type of dynamic going on, and you're being taught that, naturally the children and those that are coming from that environment are going to harp in on that. So that's why you have a music industry that is promoting the degradation of that. And then you have to also ask yourselves, you know, why is it that this is being promoted even from women's perspective? You have some artists that are out there that are women that will talk about degrading themselves or subjecting themselves to different types of behavior, whether it be for money or attention. I think that Chuck D from Public Enemy said that attention is the new currency, you know. So when you have women that are doing that, you know, it's like, okay, well, it's a holistic approach that we have to take with regards to this type of behavior and this type of culture and why it's acceptable. So that moves us into R. Kelly and what has gone on with him and the timeline as far as R. Kelly is concerned. So just running you down a couple of things that were noted about R. Kelly and his background, so it gives you a perspective of what happened. In August of '94, he married. So he was 27 years old, and he married Aaliyah, who was 15 at the time. And of course, they forged the actual not birth certificate, the marriage license to say that she was 18 years old. Right? So this is 1994. In 1996, in December, Tiffany Hawkins files suit against R. Kelly and his label, claiming personal injuries and emotional damage arising from an alleged sexual relationship with him, which says that it began when she was 15 and then it ended when she was 18. You know, and that case was reportedly settled out of court. Let's fast forward, December 2000. The Chicago Sun-Times published a report on allegations of R. Kelly having sexual relationships with girls as young as 15 years old. Of course, R. Kelly denied it. January 2001, someone dropped off a tape of R. Kelly having sex with a young, and in the report it says a young woman, but we're going to say a young girl, because if she's alleged to be 14 years old, there needs to be a distinction between woman and girl. And sometimes with the play on words, what happens is if we keep using the word a young woman, if we're referring to a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old girl, young woman, in the back of your head, you're thinking, oh, well, she's a young woman. So you're not going to be as harsh, or rather think as critically with regards to the actual state of that young girl, because she's perpetuated as a woman when in fact she is a girl, and that means of robbing her of her innocence being a girl. So it says in January 2001, the sex tape with him having sex with this young girl. August 2001, Tracy Sampson, a rapper and former intern at Epic Records, files a lawsuit against R. Kelly, claiming that he initiated a sexual relationship with her when she was 17. The case was settled out of court. In February 2002, that's when the Chicago Sun-Times says that he was being investigated by police, R. Kelly was, for another sex tape that was sent to them anonymously. In April 2002, the singer is sued by Patrice Jones, who alleges she was 16 when she began a sexual relationship with R. Kelly. That case was settled out of court. In May of 2002, This is an older woman though, but she says that R. Kelly. She was 33 years old and says that R. Kelly secretly taped her and their sexual encounters, and the tapes were being sold. And that case was later settled out of court. In June 2002, he's indicted on the 21 charges as it relates to the child pornography of the tape of the alleged young girl who was 14 years old. Of course, he maintained his innocence. In May of 2008, that's when they started the actual trial. So that would be, what, 6 years later? In June 2008, he was found not guilty on all counts after the jury deliberates for a day. Now, let's stop here for a quick second. A lot of people think that because he was acquitted of those charges that it meant that nothing happened. Now, he was acquitted because the girl in the video, they didn't know, the jury couldn't decide if she was a girl or a woman yet. So that's the reason for the actual acquittal, not because he didn't do it. In July 2014, he planned a performance at Fashion Meets Music Festival in Columbus, Ohio, and it was canceled after protests. In December 2015, those of you all may have seen the Huffington Post or HuffPost Live, where it was a host there that was asking him questions about the sexual misconduct back in the day, I guess, or in his past, and he kind of just walked off the set. In July 2017, BuzzFeed published an article claiming that he was holding a group of adult women against their will as part of some of their parents, a part of what some of their parents say is a cult. And then one of the parents, or rather one of the group of parents that came out, the Savages, were talking about their daughter Jocelyn having a sexual relationship with him and being manipulated and being cut off from the rest of the world and the family. And I think she was around 16, alleged, when this occurred. In August 2017, Geronda Pace, who was 24 years old, says breaks a non-disclosure agreement and tells BuzzFeed she was 15 and a fan when she met the singer in 2008 outside the Chicago courtroom when he had the trial, and she alleges that she began a sexual relationship with him when she was 16 years old. And then in May of 2018, last year, a 20-year-old woman filed suit against the singer claiming he unlawfully gave her alcohol, assaulted her, and gave her a sexually transmitted disease. In July 2018, that's when he released the song I Admit. And then December 2018 is when the screening happened of the Surviving R. Kelly docuseries. And then, of course, January of this year, or this month rather, is when the series debut. Now, what is alleged against R. Kelly is horrendous and horrific, right? We have to understand that R. Kelly isn't alone in this type of pattern and behavior. He's not the only one committing these allegedly committing these acts against young women and young girls. Now we have to ask ourselves as a community, are we doing this or calling R. Kelly out because he's R. Kelly? Or are we doing this because, we're using him as essentially igniting the issue and then going to tackle everybody else within our community that are engaging in this type of behavior, because it doesn't stop with him. Whatever happens to him, whether it be there's a current investigation going on about him, but if he goes to jail or if something happens to him within community, they take like street justice to him, or whatever the case may be, he's one. That means that we need to go after the rest as well, and we need to create a culture and awareness within our culture to know that this behavior is not acceptable at all. Like, this is not acceptable at all. You're talking about a group of young girls that are being preyed upon, because there's no protection around them. So some of these girls may have grown up in foster care. Some of these girls may have grown up in one-parent household, even two-parent households. But we have to check ourselves as a community to ensure that this does not happen, again, within our community. And then, so for us as men, we need to check any friends, uncles, brothers, cousins that we have that are showing, fathers that are showing this type of behavior. Because when I was growing up, it was always, okay, this is jailbait. You don't mess with young girls. You that's just like, you just don't touch that. But because of the acquiesce nature of everything that's going on now, it's like, okay, well, we don't challenge or we don't check anything. That's not our business. That's not our affairs. That's somebody else's business. And we can expand that just to what's going on within our community generally. When we see someone acting up, when we see someone disrespecting an adult, when we see a child that is acting out in some capacity. I remember back in the day, my parents used to tell me, back in the day, you would have the whole block. If there are adults on the whole block, they would check you. So when your parents actually found out what was going on, you may have gotten chastised from this neighbor, and this neighbor. And then when your parents found out about it, you got chastised by them too. So it was a very communal thing, because we understood, like, okay, you grow up knowing that, yeah, this may be Aunt Mary or the neighbor, from next door, but at the same time, she's also like a mother figure to me. She's also like an auntie to me. So I'm going to respect her just like I would respect my own family, and a lot of different, whether it be in the Caribbean, whether it be on the continent of Africa, where you see black folks throughout the diaspora, you see that it tends to be that type of ideology with regards to other black women and black men who are in your community. It's like, okay, well, you're supposed to respect them and treat them as though they are a part of your family. But what happens when those in whom you're supposed to respect and protect are the ones preying on you? That are the ones that are preying on the young folks. Then what do you do? And I think that's a big issue that we have to address as a community, and from the documentary that was out about surviving R. Kelly, we have to have takeaways. So we have all this hysteria and we have all this uproar about what was alleged in the actual documentary, but we also have to ask ourselves, well, what's the takeaway? If I'm sitting here watching this documentary, what is it that I'm supposed to take away from it? And anytime you're consuming any type of media, it should be this type of way of thinking. If I'm consuming this, what is the takeaway? Is it just for entertainment purposes? Is it a bigger meaning behind it? What is the takeaway from it? And from this docu-series, a couple of takeaways should be: one, when you see this behavior, whether you are the woman or the man, that you need to check it. You need to check that person about that particular behavior. But also, you have to tell your children or the kids within the community, whatever have you, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're not supposed to do. If somebody touches you here, if somebody says this to you, if you see some type of weird behavior, if it's something that's suspicious or makes you uncomfortable, then you need to come and you need to let me know. You need to come and tell me or tell somebody about what's going on, because we have to stop this type of behavior in our community. But not only that, here's another point. Some of the women who are alleged to have been held in the cult or alleged to have been abused by R. Kelly, they were introduced to him because they wanted to promote themselves in some capacity, or maybe they were a fan and then became involved with him, or they wanted to expand their musical career or start their musical career. So if you had a situation or a case like that, the latter, where you want to start your musical career or just expand be in the media, whatever the case may be, we also have to set up institutions for our children to be able to survive and thrive without having to be, say, a fan of someone or part of someone's entourage, or be caught up in that type of lifestyle. Because what happens is, say if you had a young girl who saw R. Kelly and was like, oh, he's famous, he's a big R&B artist. Maybe he can provide me my big break with regards to something else that I wanted to do. Well, what if the family had something set up to where, she didn't have to turn to R. Kelly to provide fame and fortune and all these things, but she was able to create the fame and fortune within her own household, or that legacy be passed down to her. Then you take out that factor of R. Kelly providing these type of initiatives, or that dangling carrot for these women to come, and then just get caught up in, or in some cases coerced in, to being within his reach, or his home, or whatever the case may be. So I think, holistically speaking, we have to look at it from all angles and all areas of life. We see historically what has happened to our black women. So the question now becomes, now that we know what's going on with R. Kelly, and there's been rumors about it for years, and now that we've seen the documentary series, what's next? What are you going to change in your day to day to ensure that this doesn't happen to the little girl down the street, or the girls in the elementary school, or even the boys? Because you have a lot of young boys that are being molested and sexually assaulted, which was the case with R. Kelly. As a child, he was sexually assaulted and molested by, I believe, his sister. At least that's what he said. So, what is it that you're going to do? We all have a part in this, and a role in this as a community, what we need to do to protect and provide for our community, as men, as women. What do we do to create that protection and that hedge of protection for our children, so that this doesn't occur again? So that's the takeaway. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, I'm your guest host, Talib Saber. This is Sis We Need to Talk. And tune in next week.